passed by really quickly, and already Vietnam and the United States are celebrating 15 years of normalization of relations. Now, in these 15 years, Vietnam and the United States have seen a lot of progress in its relation, especially of which the prominent is the trade relation, going from only $1 billion in 2001 to a whopping $15.4 billion in 2009. Now, in our special edition of Talk Vietnam today, we'll get a chance to browse through some of the achievements that Vietnam and the United States have gained in the field of trade, and also we'll take a look at how this trade relations has the potential to go forward to be much stronger. Now, in our talk today, we have the honor of welcoming to our studio today Ambassador Mr. Michael Michalak, and also with us is Mr. Nguyễn Duy Bình, who is the country manager of FedEx Vietnam and also the chief representative of FedEx Indochina. But before we start our talk, let's review some of the landmarks in the trade relations between Vietnam and the United States in the past years.
While diplomatic relations between Vietnam and the United States was normalized in 1995, the first trade contact between the two countries since the end of the war in 1975 was established much earlier. With the agreement of the U.S. administration, several American businessmen and companies started arriving in Vietnam to explore new business opportunities. On July 2, 1993, the Clinton administration cleared the way for the resumption of international lending, including that by the IMF and the World Bank to Vietnam. On February 3, 1994, President Bill Clinton lifted the U.S. trade embargo against Vietnam, and the U.S. Senate was quick in approving the decision a week later.
Today, I am announcing the normalization of diplomatic relationships with Vietnam.
On July 11, 1995, President Clinton announced the normalization of relations with Vietnam. On August 1997, the U.S. government passes special legislation permitting the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, to assist Vietnam in improving trade through a commercial law and trade policy technical program. On March 11, 1998, President Clinton issues his waiver of Jackson-Vanik Amendment for Vietnam, paving the way for OPEC, EXIM, TDA, USDA, and MARAD activities. July 13, 2000. Vietnam Trade Minister Vũ Hoan and USTR Ambassador Bashevsky signed a bilateral trade agreement at the USTR. President Clinton announces the agreement at a White House Rose Garden ceremony. The BTA came into force in December 2001, a factor held by diplomats as a major factor in normalizing economic relations between the two countries. On December 8th and 9th, 2006, U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate passed legislation to allow the extension of the Permanent Normal Trade Relations, or PNTR, status to Vietnam. Late that month, President Bush signs the proclamation extending PNTR to Vietnam as part of his accession to the WTO. The granting of the PNTR status is viewed as the final and important step in the process of normalizing Vietnam-U.S. relations. The status helped the two countries implement their commitments made under the WTO rules and the bilateral agreements for Vietnam to accede to the Global Trading Club.
So thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador and Mr. Jibing, for joining us in our studio today. I know you have a very hectic schedule, and we're very appreciative of you coming today. As we said, we're here to celebrate the 15 years of normalized relations between Vietnam and the United States. Now, for you, Mr. Ambassador, you took office 3 years ago here in Vietnam. How was Vietnam in your eyes then?
Oh, well, you know, I think the 15 years has been an amazing 15 years. I think we've come a long way. You mentioned the figure from 2001 to 2010 of 1 billion up to 15.4, but I think if you go back a little bit further, you know, back when we first started relations in 1995, I think our two-way trade was about $450 million. And over that 15 years, it has grown, as you pointed out, to 15.4 billion. Additionally, back in 1995, there was zero foreign direct investment from the United States here in Vietnam. And last year, the United States was the #1 foreign investor in the country. So I think over that time period, we've made some amazing progress. We've opened up our markets to each other, and not only in goods trades, but also in services trades. And again, education has played a big role in that. We're now moving up to the next level of trade engagement with our discussions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a very important sub-regional free trade agreement. We're also continuing our talks on a bilateral investment treaty. We are trying to explore ways to do a bilateral tax treaty. And we're working on a wide range of issues, from climate change to education to regional security issues. It's exploded, the number of topics that we're talking about, the number of visits that have gone back and forth between our two countries. So it's been a very exciting 3 years for me, and it's not over yet. So.
Right, exactly. I mean, the relations have definitely changed, not only in the 15 years, but even alone in the 3 years that you've been here. It's seen tremendous growth. Now, for you, Mr. Jibing, you've arrived to Vietnam much earlier, about 15 years ago. How was the country at that time?
1989 was when I came back to Vietnam after living 15 years in the United States. I remember coming back to Vietnam at that time. The streets were filled with less cars. The primary mode of transportation at the time was bicycles and motorbikes. There were a few cars, but they were old cars, not the new brands that you see now. There were very few high-rises, very few international restaurants, and very few foreign investments. I recall there were 3 airlines that served Vietnam, 2 of which are foreigners, and 1 was Vietnam Airlines. I recall that the employment was very high, unemployment rate was very high, it was well above 10%. The inflation was very high. Inflation was like close to 300%. Per capita income was less than $200. Yet I felt there was excitement in the air because it was the beginning stages of Đổi Mới. And there was excitement coming from the cafes, coming from the colleges, from the schools, that the future was going to be bright. And that's because of Đổi Mới. And so there was a bright light of hope at that time. I could see that in the youthfulness of the Vietnamese people, and the resilience in their determination.
You could say it was a start towards this journey, even towards going to this moment where trade relations and the economic status of the country has changed so dramatically from those days. You talked about how you came to Vietnam in 1989. How did this trip come about?
As I mentioned, after living in the United States for 15 years, I felt that there was a need to go back to visit my homeland, especially to visit my mother, who was here with my nephew. And that was a wonderful trip because I was able to seek the help of the Vietnamese government to issue a visa for her to reunite with me in the United States. I spent 2 or 3 days travel the country to see what's out there for FedEx. As a representative of FedEx, I felt that as the economy grows, the country grows, economic development will require fast, reliable transportation. And FedEx, as you know, is the world's largest air express company. So I was grateful that I had the opportunity to visit my family and at the same time to explore the market for FedEx.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about exploring the market for FedEx, we know that only 50 days after the normalization of relations between Vietnam and the United States, only 50 days, FedEx opened its first office in Vietnam. Now, indisputably, as you said, you played a major role in that happening. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, 1994 was a very special occasion for FedEx because we became the first American express company to open our doors in Vietnam to serve the business community. What I saw in 1989 as I traveled the country was a great potential for growth in Vietnam. And I captured that in my letter to my chairman, Fred Smith. And this is the letter I wrote to our chairman of FedEx, Fred Smith. We thank you for all your leadership and for the vision to allow us to come to Vietnam. And that is what opened up the door for us because of the vision of our leaders, of our chairman, and the support of the Vietnamese government and the Vietnamese people for American companies like FedEx to be able to operate here. While we operate in Vietnam, we are helping the economy to develop. Mm-hmm. We're helping the Vietnamese people to gain more access to the world through our transportation expertise. The Vietnamese government has created a lot of favorable conditions, opened up a lot of opportunities for investors, and I think investors should consider the opportunities that are here in Vietnam. And if those investors happen to be Vietnamese Americans, I think the rewards will be multiplied by many times because of the opportunities to visit family members, friends, and reunite.
So as you can see, normalization of trade relations between Vietnam and the U.S. created a lot of opportunities for such companies to come into Vietnam. What other benefits do you see in this normalized trade relations, Mr. Ambassador?
You know, I think that probably the biggest benefit was simply the opening up of our two markets to each other. That gave Vietnamese companies an opportunity to reach a market of several hundred million people and to sell their goods into the world's largest market. I think that after we did the BTA and then followed that on with the WTO, I think it kind of gave Vietnam like a good housekeeping seal of approval. You know, one of the world's largest economies has said, yes, you know, we think that we've got a good trade relationship with Vietnam, so it's okay for us, our companies, to come in and trade. But it also kind of sent a message to other countries saying that now it's okay for everybody to come in and trade. And I think with WTO and PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations, Vietnam saw its average tariff level with the United States go from 40% down to 4%. So again, just huge opportunities for opening up. But Vietnam, of course, didn't stop there. In 2007, it joined the World Trade Organization, another step forward, which again brought more benefits because it meant lower tariffs, it meant lower trade barriers around the world, and increased opportunity for Vietnam to broaden and strengthen its trade relations. And after that, Vietnam branched out. 2008, 2009, Vietnam became non-permanent members of the UN Security Council and began playing a big role on the world stage. And of course, this year, Vietnam is the chair of ASEAN. So I think that you can see the evolution from first opening up, doing the reform and opening, now doing integration into the global economy. And I like to think that the United States has tried to play a supportive role there.
Now, the Vietnam-U.S. bilateral trade agreement, the BTA, signed in 2001, as Mr. Ambassador had said, led to a remarkable rise in the trade relations of Vietnam and also with the United States, and also the economic growth of the country alone when it came into force in 2001. FedEx is among a great number of American companies which has witnessed this dramatic change in terms of the economy of Vietnam going in a skyrocketing development. And we'll take a look in the following report about how.
Launching its business in Vietnam since 1995, The development of the FedEx Vietnam is a prime example of the progress in two-way trade. At present, company dedicates one flight a day carrying some 30 tons in express goods, a rise of some 30 to 35% compared to the same period last year. It has also increased its delivery staff number to some 400 now to serve growing customer demand. Vietnam Airlines purchased 4 777s directly from Boeing in January 2002. This was a major commercial landmark underwritten the US-based Exim Bank. The addition of the 777 to Vietnam Airlines fleet was a significant milestone, highlighting Vietnam Airlines as a truly global carrier. During the past 15 years, the U.S. has become Vietnam's top trading partner. Figures from the U.S. Embassy in Vietnam show that the two-way trade has grown from $1 billion in 2001 to $15.4 billion in 2009. Exports from Vietnam to the United States are predicted to maintain a growth of between 23 to 25%, with key items including textiles, furniture, footwear, and seafood.
When you're in the United States and you see products that are made in Vietnam, and when you're in Vietnam and you see that the United States is the largest foreign investor in Vietnam, and the United States is Vietnam's most important export market, those figures were unimaginable even 10 years ago, and the hard work that the Vietnamese government and the Vietnamese people have done to implement the commitments of the BTA, implement the commitments of WTO accession.
U.S. exports to Vietnam consist mainly of transportation, machinery, manufactured products, food, and other primary products. American is also one of the main cotton suppliers for Vietnam's garment and textile industry.
Trong vòng có 8 năm, từ năm 2002 cho đến năm 2010, thì Việt Nam đã vươn lên là cái nước xuất khẩu lớn thứ hai vào thị trường Hoa Kỳ. Ngoài ra thì cũng phải thấy rằng chúng ta xuất sang Hoa Kỳ thì chúng ta cũng nhập lại bông từ Hoa Kỳ với một số lượng rất là lớn. Hiện nay thì cái nguồn bông từ Hoa Kỳ nhập vào Việt Nam cũng chiếm đến trên 50% tổng nhu cầu bông sử dụng của Việt Nam. Và như năm vừa rồi thì chúng ta đã nhập từ Hoa Kỳ đến trên 150.000 tấn bông, có trị giá là trên 200 triệu đô la. Và như vậy thì tôi nghĩ rằng Việt Nam sẽ nhập rất nhiều bông của Hoa Kỳ và ngược lại sẽ xuất hàng may mặc sang Hoa Kỳ. Thì cái con đường đó chúng ta có thể áp dụng còn rất nhiều năm về sau.
But as trade grows strongly, several disputes have emerged against Vietnamese products such as fish, shrimp, and textiles. According to the Deputy U.S. Trade Representative's Ambassador, the U.S. and Vietnam have developed a really balanced trade relationship. The U.S. will work on issues as openly and transparently as possible and in a manner that is consistent with its trade obligation.
For you, Mr. Zibing, how have you seen, working in the field here in Vietnam for so long, how have you seen the trade relations between Vietnam and the United States grow? I mean, what are some of the developments that you have seen?
As the ambassador said, since the bilateral treaty was signed, and then when Vietnam became a member of WTO in 2007, we have seen tremendous growth in trade between the two countries, as well as Vietnam trade into the world. That trade, the growth in trade has propelled the economy to grow at a faster speed, which dictated the need for more time-definite transportation and logistics support for companies to move their products from Vietnam to the world. FedEx is very pleased to have the opportunity to be part of that development.
Right. And not only FedEx, I mean, the United States has become a major partner in helping Vietnam to be where it is at right now. Now, Mr. Ambassador, a lot of bilateral agreements and governmental decisions have played a great part in kind of strengthening that trade relations between Vietnam and the United States. What is your assessment of the effectiveness of the commitments to the agreements by both sides?
Well, I think when you talk about BTA and or the WTO, I think that both governments have taken those commitments extremely seriously. Our STAR program and our Vietnam Competitiveness Initiative, I think we have, again, expanded capacity within the government of Vietnam so that the government understood exactly what kind of commitments it was getting into at the time, and it has worked very hard to try and implement those. Additionally, we also have another agreement between our two countries called the Trade and Investment Facilitation Agreement, the TIFA. And under the TIFA, we meet probably once or twice every year, and we talk about issues like implementation of agreements plus any other trade issues that come up. So I think that we have set up a number of channels whereby we can talk with each other about how we're doing on implementation, correct any deficiencies that may come up, and give each other suggestions on how to do it better.
Being one of the first chairmen of AmCham, what comments do you have on this issue, Mr.
You were
Nguyen?
chairman? I didn't know that.
Yes, I was chairman of AmCham in 2004 in the Ho Chi Minh City chapter. I really believe that Vietnam has come a long way, and Vietnam has done a great job in integrating into the world, streamlining its legal framework, improving every day on its activities relative to reforming, for example, customs reform, border inspection reforms to expedite and facilitate trade, to make things faster, and to make things more efficient to run the business. You know, foreign investors who come to Vietnam, they invest and they would like to have a predictable outcome for their investments. And I think Vietnam is taking the right steps to ensure that predictability.
Now, Mr. Ambassador, going back to the United States now, as we have seen in the past year, there was the global economic recession, and that took a toll on a lot of countries, America included. And now the United States is transforming itself into becoming an export-led country. How do you think this policy will affect the trade relations between the United States and Vietnam?
As our economy grows, and consumption still plays a very large part of that, I think you're going to see that Vietnam's exports to the United States will grow. As you know, President Obama has said that he'd like to see the United States double its exports over the next 5 years. Well, over the past 5 years, Vietnam's exports to the United States have grown from about $6 billion to almost $12 billion. So I think President Obama is just saying, gee, we ought to do what Vietnam did. Because you guys have already doubled your exports. And, you know, even as we increase our exports, I think it does represent more opportunities for Vietnamese firms.
Thank you very much for sharing all of your valuable experience with me and our audience today. Thank you again for being here in our studio, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors in the future, continuing to be at the forefront of boosting the trade relations between Vietnam and the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with the ambassador and to be here on your show. Heard a lot of good things about your show.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have too.
In the second part of the show, we have the very honor of welcoming to our studio today our distinguished guest, Ms. Virginia Foote, who is the chairwoman of the U.S.-Vietnam Trade Council, and also Mr. Nguyen Duy Huynh, who is the Director General of American Market Department of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Now, Huynh was also the former commercial counselor of the Vietnam Embassy based in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Ms. Foote and Mr. Nguyen Duy Huynh, for joining us today in our studio. I know you have a very hectic schedule, but it's great that you are here with us today.
No, delighted to be here.
Great.
It's our pleasure.
Yes. Now, Vietnam, as you know, and the United States are celebrating 15 years of normalized relations, and also it's been 9 years since the BTA, the bilateral trade agreement, was signed. Now, for you, Ms. Foote, you've been in this process, I mean, since the early 1990s. Could you share your feelings of being so closely connected to kind of reaching that normalization between Vietnam and the United States?
Well, my first trip to Vietnam was in 1989, and I came with my then boss, Ambassador Sullivan, who had been invited by your foreign minister, Nguyen Co Thach. So I came in '89 when your government was reaching out to the U.S. government to begin the process of normalization, and I was delighted to come on that first trip and see Vietnam for the first time. I came with Ambassador Sullivan, who had been here many times, so I was learning through his eyes the history of Vietnam and really the optimism that Vietnam had about moving forward with Vietnam.
Now, in your opinion, what do you think brought Vietnam and the United States together to be able to reach the bilateral trade agreement in 2001?
Well, it's been a 20-year process, really. I'm delighted to see these photographs here, that some of the key players on both sides are in these pictures. And you could start with Senator John Kerry and John McCain. The veterans in the U.S. At the very early stage played a very important role in wanting to see a new future between the U.S. and Vietnam. John Kerry and John McCain don't agree on the war itself, but they did agree on what should happen in the future, and so building on that, and they really took a leadership role. There were members of the Vietnamese American community who saw, we can't all agree about the past, but let's try to build a new future. And that community played a tremendous role in the U.S. And then I think the third piece was the business community, who felt there was great opportunity here, there could be a good bilateral trade and investment climate, and really worked and pushed to get normalization.
Now, for you, Mr. Nguyen, working in the United States, as we said, as a commercial counselor in the embassy based in Washington, D.C., how did you see the change, the growth of trade between Vietnam and the United States?
The changes for the last 15 years is great. Last year, the trade volume, two-way trade volume between the two countries reached nearly $15 billion US, about 15 times over the trade volume of 2001, the year before the BTA coming into effect. And recently, the U.S. has merged as the biggest, the largest foreign investor in Vietnam, with the presence of many giant companies, groups, and giant projects, such as Intel high-tech project worth more than $1 billion US, or the agreement to build thermal power in Quang Ninh worth more than $2 billion US with AES has been signed, or the GE turbine, power turbine has gone into operation. So the changes, as Madam Foot said, is complete, and the relations is transformed to a new stage. And if the U.S. did not fall into economic difficulty recently, the trade and economic cooperation between the two countries would have been even more developed.
So you could say that the bilateral trade agreement laid a milestone for all of this growth to go forward, not only in terms of the figures of the economic growth, but also in all fields of relations between the two countries. Now, as the chairwoman of U.S.-Vietnam Trade Council, Ms. Foot, how have you seen, how do you think Vietnamese and American businesses have made use of this bilateral trade agreement?
Well, I think as Mr. Tin said, the numbers are dramatic and impressive and continue to grow. Every year is better than the last. Foreign direct investment continues to grow. The trade volume now, Vietnam is selling more to the U.S. than is buying from the U.S., so we have to work on those numbers. but the success is really in the numbers. I think the flip side is to always be looking at projects that don't happen, or people who come to Vietnam from the U.S. and who don't stay. And one of the things that we try to do is to look at that and to understand why, and to try to help improve the system or improve the process so that more and more people, when they come, they stay. They don't come and look, but they come and stay. And I think that's, that's where the growth is for Vietnam.
Now, before we continue our talk, let's take a look at a clip. We're going to take a look at how the Vietnamese market is seen in the eyes of American businessmen who have long connected to Vietnam in the past 15 years.
From just some representatives' offices, IBM Vietnam has developed into the first 100% foreign-owned subsidiary in Vietnam. After the BTA agreement was reached, IBM has made a breakthrough with the opening of its global service centers in Vietnam. According to the country director of IBM Vietnam, Võ Tấn Long, many American businesses have so far satisfied with their operation in Vietnam.
Vừa rồi thì tôi có một cái vinh dự được tham dự một chuỗi các cái buổi làm việc của cái hội đồng kinh doanh giữa Mỹ và ASEAN. Đó là một cái đoàn bao gồm 23 cái doanh nghiệp khá là lớn, có thể nói là lớn nhất của Mỹ mà đã có đầu tư ở Việt Nam. Thì chúng tôi rất là vui mừng nhìn thấy những cái thành tựu mà hầu hết tất cả các doanh nghiệp nó đạt được ở Việt Nam. Hy vọng rằng là cho đến 5 năm nữa tới, khi chúng ta kỷ niệm 20 năm ngày bình thường hóa quan hệ, thì đó nó sẽ là một cái sự phát triển toàn diện và sâu rộng trong hầu hết tất cả các cái lĩnh vực của nền kinh tế, chứ không chỉ ở trong một số những lĩnh vực mà hiện nay người ta coi là mũi nhọn.
In the telecom sector, the Vietnam Post and Telecommunications Group contracted Lockheed Martin to design, build and launch a telecommunications satellite in a deal worth around $200 million. Vietnam's first communications satellite, Vinasat-1, was successfully launched at 22:17 GMT on April the 18th, 2008. Aboard an Ariane 5 carrier rocket from Kourou, French Guiana. The successful launch of Vietnam's first telecom satellite was a very important step for the trade relationship between Vietnam and the United States.
Vietnam is currently the 30th largest trading partner of the United States. I think if the U.S. government and the Vietnamese government work hard, we can grow that number, and Vietnam can be even a more significant trading partner of the United States.
Vietnam is growing fast. It opens up more opportunities in trade. The potential to boost two-way trade activities should be further capitalized on in the future with commitments from both sides.
Now, continuing with our discussion, Ms. Phut, well, talking about attracting more investors into Vietnam, I mean, you've been in Vietnam, as you said, the first time you were here was in 1989. It's quite a while now. You have a very good understanding of what's happening here in Vietnam. What would you say to American investors, American businessmen who are coming into Vietnam? What do they have to do in order to prepare themselves to go into this market?
Well, I think in order to go into any market, you have to do your homework, obviously. There are a lot of big American companies who are quite familiar with global trends and global trade and global procedures. But there are many American companies who maybe they trade with one of our immediate neighbors. So to come to a country like Vietnam is unique and different and something of a challenge. So it's a question of, is your business appropriate here? Do you have a good counterpart in Vietnam? Do you understand what either product you're trying to sell or what project you're trying to develop, and whether there's a local or foreign, or who's your audience for that product?
Exactly.
I think you really, to go into any country, you really have to do your homework and be realistic about what your possibilities are.
Now, in your own opinion, has Vietnam done a good job? Has it succeeded in creating an image of a reliable, good partner, business partner with other American business groups?
Yes, but I think there are things that need to continue to be worked on, as there are for every country. You can never get to a point where you say we've done everything that needs to be done and now we just implement it. I think the WTO and international trade agreements try to set the rules for what comes and goes across the border. But what has to happen within the border is an increased level of transparency. The accounting system in Vietnam is not the international standard, and companies don't feel they understand the books, the tax system, the payment system of their counterpart. And that's something that I think Vietnam needs to continue to work on to go the next step in attracting partnerships.
On the flip side of the development between Vietnam and the United States, not only are American businesses looking to go into Vietnam, but also Vietnamese businesses are looking at the U.S. market as well. Now, as the former attaché in terms of commerce for the Vietnamese embassy in the United States, how do you, Mr. Hien, evaluate the potential of the U.S. market?
I think the potential of the U.S. market is great, and for the past few years, the U.S. has become the biggest export market of Vietnam, but Vietnam ranked only the 30th largest trading partner of the U.S. So there is still spacious room for Vietnam to improve its position in this market. Every year the U.S. import around 2,000 billion U.S. dollar worth of goods, and it's a huge market for us and for everyone. And every companies in the world is looking for the U.S. as their market. And the product such as textiles, footwear, furniture or electronics, which we have potential for export, are the products the U.S. needs to import with increasing volume. And the U.S. can supply also many competitive products which we need to import, such as animal feed, means of transportation, high-tech equipment, and chemicals, and many more. So the economic structure of two countries are really supplement.
Well, you mentioned some of the top products that Vietnam would like to import or is importing from the United States. In terms of the other way around, some of the top products that Vietnam is exporting to the United States now are leather footwear, stuff like textile and garment, and also products in aquaculture and agriculture. However, there are issues with anti-dumping lawsuits and also disputes over trademarks and among others. How do you think, what would be your advice for Vietnamese businesses currently who have a wish to enter into the American market?
I think first thing is that they should not put all their eggs in one basket. It means they have to diversify their export market. Maybe some companies find they can export to the U.S. market now and they can get good money, and they just focus on the market. They don't look for other markets. So when the trade disputes arise, they have no alternative markets for their products. So that's one thing. Another thing is they should focus on the value, on the quality of the products, on the design of the products, on the service, so they can charge higher price. Do not focus, do not compete on price or on volume. If they compete on price, they cut the price, and then one day they will face, anti-dumping case, for example. And as I said, we have to prepare for trade disputes. So they have to keep good accounting record, to have full information to serve investigation. If they cannot provide enough or correct full information for investigators, they will use whatever information available to them. So those information are usually, not good for defendant, and it will result in higher rate of anti-dumping.
Now, along with all these drastic changes in the past 15 years, going into the future now, Mr. Kien, how do you see the trade relations between Vietnam and the United States grow?
I think the trend of growth will continue, and U.S. will continue to be our important, very, very important export market. And U.S. will be among the biggest investor in Vietnam, and not only in economic and trade relations, other relations are developing well now.
What about for you, Ms. Foot? How do you forecast the changes or the future of the bilateral trade relations between Vietnam and the U.S.?
Well, I'm delighted that last year both Vietnam and the U.S. Decided to go into the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the first real APEC countries. There will be 8 in this agreement, 8 or 9, who have started a process of a regional agreement. The U.S. and Vietnam have not been in a regional agreement with each other, so this is a very important next step. And I think that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP as we call it, will increase the horizontal harmonization, meaning that the way to do business in one country is not too different from the way to do business in another country.
Well, thank you very much for your contribution to boosting the trade relations between Vietnam and the U.S. And I hope that you will have much more luck in terms of continuing that effort. And thank you again for being in our studio today to share your valuable experience.
Thank you very much for having us today.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this edition of Talk Vietnam. We talked today in order to celebrate the 15 years of normalized relations between the U.S. and Vietnam, particularly in the field of trade. We'll talk more next time. Goodbye.